Hey everyone, it's Simi Shaw, and welcome to Trailblazers. Through this series, we bring you trailblazing by South Asians and for South Asians. We're the torchbearers, sharing the stories of the leaders and innovators lighting the way across the South Asian diaspora. Joining us today is Sheel Mohnot, serial entrepreneur, fintech investor, and acquired podcaster. A graduate of Carnegie Mellon and the University of Michigan, Sheel was formerly a general partner with the FinTech Fund at 500 Startups. More recently, he co-founded Better Tomorrow Ventures, a fund leading pre-seed and seed rounds in fintech companies around the globe. Sheel and his co-founder raised a $75 million debut fund that closed in November 2020. Sheel also has extensive experience as a founder. His first venture ever was Innovative Auctions, a provider in auction software and consulting services related to the internet. He also exited FeeFighters, a Stripe-like product that sold to Groupon in 2012, and a food delivery company called Thistle. And of course, I have to highlight the fact that Sheel is a former podcaster. He co-founded The Pitch, which was meant to serve as a more realistic version of Shark Tank. The podcast sold to Gimlet Media, which was then acquired by Spotify. Sheel has an amazing fintech portfolio that spans the globe, and as a startupper myself with an eye on investing, I'm so thrilled to welcome you to the podcast today, Sheel.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, excited to be here.
Awesome. So something that stood out to me, and that has stood out to me since I've been following your life and career, is your new fund that you co-founded and the fact that you guys decided to name it Better Tomorrow Ventures. Can you describe the genesis of the name?
Yeah, absolutely. So it actually kind of has two meanings. It's one, we're investing for a better future. We think financial technology is a great way to improve people's lives. And that's what we're hoping for. The companies that we invest in, we hope make the world a little bit of a better place. But then it's also, we want to constantly better ourselves. So we want to do better tomorrow.
Wow.
We're always aspiring to what could we have done better will be the better tomorrow.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like there's so many new funky names for VC funds coming out there that just immediately caught my attention once I learned what BTV stood for. So obviously you guys have this focus on fintech and you've been focused on the space as an investor, but you really found your way into it as an entrepreneur. Why this space? What made you fall in love with fintech?
Yeah, I think it's really that. You have the potential to change people's lives. And that's definitely what I can say looking backwards, but also you kind of just fall into things realistically. So my fintech background started on the nonprofit side at Kiva. Kiva is a website where individuals can make loans to people in the developing world. And that was my first exposure to startups and to fintech. Even though it was a nonprofit, it was really operating like a startup with the founders worked at PayPal and TiVo before. And that was my first exposure to fintech. I then went into consulting. I was primarily serving financial institutions and then saw a need, and a buddy of mine wanted to leave consulting and start this company, and I joined him. And that was FeeFighters. We got acquired in 2012. And I just found that I really liked fintech. The second company, Innovative Auctions, wasn't purely fintech. It's an auction house, but there are a lot of fintech components to it. And then when it came time to start a fund, I just felt like people were not valuing fintech enough. I thought fintech was undervalued. And today it looks like that seems to be correct because the market has really valued fintech quite highly nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to spend a second on some of those experiences you had at Kiva and FeeFighters and these other places. But Innovative Auctions, from what I remember, you met your co-founder on a train in India, yes?
Yeah, you've done your research. Yeah, I met Ulrich on a train in India, like a 40-hour train ride.
Wow.
We were going to the same conference. It was called Air Jaldi, and it was about internet networking in India or rural areas. This is in 2006. So kind of crazy, met him on a train, and then we just got along. And then we just went on a couple other trips together at later points. And then one day in 2013, we were just talking about ideas, and he had this idea and we decided to do it together.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were living in India at the time, right? Can you speak a little bit about that experience?
Yeah. So I was living in India while working for Kiva, and it was a great experience. I did a program called IndieCore that unfortunately is no longer doing the fellowship, but it was really interesting. I lived like my borrowers. So borrowers at Kiva don't make very much money. So I ended up living on a 3,000 rupee a month salary, which was $60. So a couple dollars a day.
Wow.
And, it was a really transformative experience for me. I sort of realized I don't need that much to be happy. I kind of realized you have to create interesting solutions when you don't have much money. And so it was a great experience for me.
Yeah, definitely sounds like an experience more of us should try to have in terms of living modestly. At the time you were in India, the startup and tech ecosystem was just starting to burgeon. And as you mentioned, Kiva was a nonprofit, but you said it operated a lot more like a startup. What is it like looking back at India and that ecosystem now, given you were there in what I would consider early days?
Yeah, totally. So, what's interesting is even back in 2006, 7, there wasn't that much tech venture. Like you kind of knew all the people. I wasn't in the space. I was in microfinance, but just being interested in the space, looked around and saw what was going on. I think there just wasn't much money. There weren't that many funds
Yeah.
investing in the space. And then a couple of years later, a bunch of funds started investing in India after having seen success in China. And a lot of those folks actually failed. They thought India was a great comparable to China, which it wasn't. It's a different beast. And there are reasons why India is very different from China. Obviously, the government and population and sort of the percentage of people who actually have money are very different. But today, I think India is a great place to invest. And things have completely
Yeah.
changed from those days where today, really great smartphone penetration. And thanks to Reliance Jio and others, there's really great broadband penetration that was not there before. So I think now India has finally turned the corner and is a great place to invest.
Absolutely. It's funny, at the end of 2020, I saw a roundup and it showed the number of unicorns coming out of India over the course of the last couple of years. And I think in 2018, it was around 10. Towards the end of last year, it was around 27. And I think just in Q1 2021, we're approaching the high 30s, which is obviously really exciting in terms of a tech venture ecosystem standpoint, but obviously from a personal standpoint, you love to see that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously, you had these experiences on the entrepreneurial end of things, but then you decided to switch over to what I like to call the dark side, the investing side of things. What led to that pivot?
Yeah. Okay. So when I was raising money at FeeFighters, I was sort of like looking across the table and thinking, I want to be those guys. Like they have the money, they're the smart ones, they know what to do. I really kind of idolized it when I was on the other side. And then now, of course, I know the venture capitalists are not the smart ones. We don't know everything. But that was sort of what I thought. And then to go into it, I started out angel investing after our exit in 2012. I think for a few reasons. One, like I had just moved to San Francisco. So it was getting to know people. It was, I wanted to be inspired and potentially think about a company I could join or ideas to jog my memory around what I might want to start. And then 3, it was making money. That was not the primary goal. And then it ended up being that if you were an investor at that time, you probably did really well. So
Yeah.
ended up being that some of those companies have done really well, but that was not the primary motivator initially.
I love that. And I think that's becoming an even more common trajectory in terms of founders going over to the VC side once they've exited a company or come into some money. Generally, there's also a lot more excitement about getting into angel investing nowadays. And previously, it used to be a lot more nebulous and harder to break into. Knowing that and understanding that that process is being democratized more so now, what advice would you give to young professionals who are interested in breaking into investing or specifically angel investing?
Yeah. So I think the easiest thing to do is to start to be helpful and find people that you think are smart and are starting interesting companies and be helpful to them. And then try to introduce them to other people who have a checkbook. And then if you are doing that and you have some money, it doesn't have to be a lot. You can get started and build a portfolio. I know of people who've started investing with $2,000 checks at a time.
Wow.
So that is certainly possible. And you build a portfolio and track record. And then if you're helpful, people think great things about you and want to give you bigger allocations. And then you refer people to funds and you build a network that way. I think that's a really good way of going about it. I think in general, there's this, if you start by being helpful, good things will come your way.
Yeah, honestly, I imagine that that is underrated advice. So appreciate you sharing that. As I mentioned a second ago, there's this wave of democratization going on in terms of being able to invest in startups or opportunities that previously had been more closed door opportunities. I know you've opined on this to some degree on Twitter, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on this new wave of regulation crowdfunding where startups are raising rounds through platforms like Republic or Refunder. How do you feel about this trend?
Yeah, so I'm really torn on it. The two sides are, one, if you don't allow this, then you're holding people back from wealth generation. So that's one viewpoint. The other viewpoint is if you allow this, people are just going to be sucked into investing in stupid things that are scams. So I don't know where I sit because both are true. And just yesterday or 2 days ago, they expanded crowdfunding to allow people to crowdfund up to $5 million from unaccredited investors. And
Yep.
already I looked through the listings on Republic and some of them are pure garbage. There's zero chance of anybody making money on them. And that makes me really sad.
Wow.
Because these are people who don't have much money, who are investing their hard-earned buck into something that unfortunately has no chance of getting them any money. And I think most of what you see on there are things that venture capitalists looked at and chose not to invest
and said
in.
No.
Said no. And
Yeah.
some people have said to me, hey, that's because you're just applying your existing filters of pattern recognition, blah, blah, blah. That certainly may be true, but unfortunately, I've seen stuff that is pure scams. And if you do the homework, it's very easy to see that. So I'm really torn because I want crowdfunding to be a thing. I think one really cool thing I've seen is Gagan Biani has a new startup. I don't know if you've interviewed him. You should. He has a new startup. And one thing that he did that I thought was really interesting was he raised money from traditional venture capitalists and then set aside a portion of his round that he opened up to crowdfunding. And that is great because the traditional venture capitalists, you can count on them to have done their homework in terms of understanding the founders, the customers, all that sort of stuff.
Done their diligence.
Yeah, done their diligence. And then what it allows him to do is have a base of supporters that he would not have had if he didn't do the crowdfunding campaign. So I think that is a really interesting thing that should be done in the future. And maybe people should reserve 10% of their round to crowdfund and get a base of fans or let your customers invest or that sort of thing.
It's interesting that you say that because another trend that I've been noticing is that in an attempt to diversify a startup's cap table, a lot of founders are setting aside a portion of their rounds, often something like 10%, specifically to allow underrepresented investors to come in and invest. And I believe that's in line with this whole idea of democratizing access to deals and these opportunities. As someone that's spent time in this space, obviously South Asians are not underrepresented here, but there's a long way to go in terms of diversity. How do you think about diversity? What have you done to try and diversify this industry?
Yeah, sure. I think we're really mindful about it. And there are certain underrepresented minorities for whom we'll almost always take a meeting. And I think that's something that Jake and I have talked about and is important to us. And then on the hiring side, we're definitely trying to hire people who don't look like us. And so that's a conscious effort we've made. I think in particular, I mean, there are a bunch of reasons why we don't want to hire people that look like us, but one big one is frankly, there definitely could be blind spots. Like Jake and I are very similar, we're the same age, have similar backgrounds, and tend to like similar companies. And that's great, but also we'd love to be challenged. And I think already in having women in our meetings, they've come from a different perspective that we really appreciate. So we're looking to add more diversity there and think it's really important.
Yeah, that's great to hear. That took me back to what you said earlier about pattern recognition and having familiarity with what a good company looks like. How has your experience as an entrepreneur and founder informed your lens as an investor?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think as an investor, first of all, like my time as an entrepreneur, the spaces that I invested in are not necessarily where I invest today. So it's not necessarily that background that's helpful, but it's really what it takes to succeed. I feel like I've learned a little bit, not the expert by any means, but it's really time and time again, what I come back to is somebody who's just going to bust through walls to make it happen. And I remember going through very difficult periods in all the startups, actually. I would say like all three of them. We had very difficult times in which people wanted to give up. And that always happens in a startup. And sometimes people do give up, and other people bust through walls to make it happen or change course and do something different. And when I was sort of doing a reflection on my portfolio, I saw that actually the majority of my winners are doing something at least a little bit different than what I invested in. And so they were able to pivot into something that made sense. And companies that didn't work out, like things weren't working and the founders gave up. So
Yeah.
that's been a really important learning for me. And then I'd say one thing about Jake and myself being former founders that I think is underappreciated is where it really helps is winning the deal. Founders want to work with other founders. Winning the deal is really, I think, an under talked about thing, because in many cases where we invested, the founders had 3, 4, 5 other options of who to take money from, and they chose us.
Wow.
And it's because our sales pitch is simple. We are founders, we're FinTech founders, and we've been through a lot of challenges as founders and can have empathy for whatever you're going through. And then all we do is FinTech. Any problem that you're going to face, either we've helped people solve it in the past or we know the right people to help you solve it. And that has been really
Wow.
winning for us. So I think the founder thing really helps in winning deals and helping the portfolio more than necessarily spotting opportunities.
Yeah, super interesting. What led you to focus specifically on the seed and pre-seed stage?
Yeah, great question. I think being founders, we feel like where we can be most impactful is at seed. Founders need the most support, and we love talking to our founders and helping them through a problem. I'd say like it's something that I think every one of our founders would say clearly shows that this is what we love doing. We love helping hiring, thinking through distribution, building company culture, strategic partnerships, and raising the next round. And all of those things are most impactful at seed. So I would say we couldn't help ourselves.
Yeah.
This is what we love doing.
Yeah, it seems like you guys really enjoy being involved in the operational aspect of jumpstarting the business. Which
Yeah.
I know obviously gets tougher the later stage you go. The startup I work at, we're seed stage, but we're backed by a venture studio. So there's a lot of operational overlap, and it's honestly a lot of fun. I really enjoy being able to have that collaborative relationship with the studio and the people that we work with and just having that added perspective. I'm curious, like I said, it does sound like you have quite a knack and penchant for the operational side of things. Is there a part of you that would ever go back to the founder side of things?
You know, it's something I've thought about a lot. I think if I were to do it, it would be something more like we incubate a business and I spend part of my time on that business and part of my time as a venture capitalist. I just love being a VC. And I think I'm a better investor than I am a founder. So
Interesting.
I should keep doing what I think I'm good at least.
Why do you say that?
One of the things in my personality is I don't do well with extreme focus. And one of the things that's amazing about being an entrepreneur is today I can work on 8 different companies and they're all sort of different parts. 1 hour it's hiring, then it's thinking about pricing. Like there are all these different things, or meeting somebody new. And it's so many different things that I love it. It's just what I love doing. Versus on the startup, you're basically focused on doing one thing. And I think I'm not as good there. I think I'm better at doing multiple things. So
Things.
I feel like I found the thing that's good for me.
Yeah, that resonates a ton personally. I think I find myself most bored when I'm doing one thing at a time, which is why I do
You
Trailblazers
have a
and a
podcast.
bunch of other
Yeah,
things.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So,
That's why I started a podcast. So very
yeah.
similar.
And speaking of that, I do want to chat about that because I think it's so fascinating. You obviously started the pitch because Shark Tank wasn't cutting it.
Yeah.
Then you sold it to Gimlet, which was acquired by Spotify. What was it about Shark Tank that was just really frustrating you?
Yeah, so I think what happened was I was sick. This is in 2015. I was at home sick for like a few days and I was just watching stupid stuff on TV, including Shark Tank. And there was some like Shark Tank marathon and I was just watching it, fascinated. I think they've done a great job of building up those personalities. They've done a phenomenal job at. But as for like the companies, I was watching a towel with a hole on it pitch on Shark Tank. I was like, this is so stupid. This is not what venture investing is. What if we did something that was more real and you could invest in companies that actually are what venture capitalists invest in? And if you look at most of the stuff on Shark Tank, it's not really venture scale businesses for the most part.
Yep.
There have been some
It's
for
like
sure,
consumer
but for the most part, it's not.
products.
Yeah, it's a lot of consumer products. And that's partially because that's what everyone can understand who's watching Shark Tank. And then also partially because people appearing on Shark Tank are doing it in large part to get that audience for their consumer product. So I thought, what if we do something more real? And so the idea was I was angel investing at the time. And I thought, what if I just hit record when people are pitching me? And that's how we started out. Literally just hit record when people are pitching me. And then I'd have an expert listen to that 30-minute pitch back and forth and then give their feedback is how it started. And then it evolved over time and then eventually became actually a lot more like Shark Tank where we realized, hey, those guys actually figured out something that makes sense, which is the I'm in for. And that really skyrocketed us. So we started in 2015, got a bunch of subscribers through Product Hunt initially and then kind of Twitter and stuff.
Oh, wow.
And then January 2017, we got this amazing feature on Apple where if you opened up the podcast app, we were literally the top banner. It was like, listen to the pitch. And that was super surreal that all these people were opening up their podcast app, millions of people opening up their podcast app and seeing our podcast was super cool. And that's partially what led to the acquisition. Gimlet reached out to us very shortly afterwards. And we got acquired and then sort of relaunched the show that summer in 2017.
Yeah, that's amazing. And dream state for people like myself who are just venturing into the podcasting biz.
It was a dream for us too. Frankly, when we started the podcast, we cold emailed all the Gimlet people and we were like, hey, listen to us. And then like, we never got a response. So
yeah, that's
totally,
awesome.
totally dream state getting that email. Hey, we've been listening and like your show. And they thought it would be a good partner to start up podcast.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm curious, what are the key things you look for in a pitch?
Yeah, I'll talk about what I'm looking for in a company. Part of it is what I like in a pitch. Part of it is what I like in a company. I'd say investing at seed, the number one thing I care about is the team. We invest in teams. You know, what I talked about earlier was so many people go through pivots, so many companies go through pivots. Above everything else, the team always stays. So what I'm looking for there, again, is are they somebody who can do the job? Will they break through walls to make it happen? Ideally, they have some domain knowledge to help on it. Do they have a good team dynamic? Ideally, they have some business side and technology side because we're investing in technology companies. So ideally, they have a CTO already. And then I think the number one thing on team is, are they able to clearly articulate their vision? This is primarily the CEO's job. Your job is really telling a story and recruiting people to that story. And when I say recruiting people, you're recruiting employees, you're recruiting investors,
Customers.
and you're recruiting customers. And so are they able to tell an articulate vision about what they're doing? That's like sort of the main thing on the team. And then I'd say, is there any traction? So when I say traction, a lot of people think there has to be dollars in revenue. That's usually not the case. Most of our investments were done pre-revenue, but they have some other traction or they've proven out something. They've done customer interviews. They've put up a landing page and seen how much it costs to acquire a customer for that landing page. Something like that is really helpful. And then On the tech side, what's the innovation here? Is there a new product? Is it a new business model? Are they iterating on the tech fast? And then I think about, will this ever make money at some state in the future? Is this going to be a company that makes a lot of money? Are they going to be able to acquire customers at a reasonable price? Are they going to make enough money to justify that? Those are all things I'm thinking about in the pitch. And then in terms of the pitch itself, I think it really comes down to the crispness and articulateness. The pitch itself is how the founder can demonstrate that vision and storytelling capability.
Yeah, I appreciate that breakdown in terms of components of the pitch itself and then the craft of actually giving a pitch. Obviously, what comes after that is the investment itself. And over the course of your angel investing career, and now with BTV, you've made a significant number of investments over the years. I know you're not allowed to have a favorite child, but is there any investment company or process that really resonates with you that you carry with you with particular fondness?
I would not say that I have a favorite. I'd say there have been so many companies that I am so excited about what they're doing and what the founder's story is. The first one that comes to mind, though, is a company I invested in a long time ago called Flexport. It's in the import-export space. So if you have a bunch of goods in China and want to import them to the United States, there's a bunch of steps in between, and Flexport helps with those steps. So, I met this founder, Ryan, and I think what really compelled me by him was how scrappy he was. And he and I were able to share all these stories about being super scrappy. One thing that we were doing is we were both buying Google ads for our Uber promo code and getting like a significant discount on Uber by doing that. And I just like really appreciated his scrappiness and thoughtfulness around that. And then he had started another company in the past that was actually importing furniture from China. And then he started another company that was called Import Genius that allowed you to see what imports were coming into the country. And so I was like, this guy has the perfect background to start this company. He's faced the problem himself, and he's built a company that has a lot of the data and customer connections that he needs. So that was a really great background. And so when I met him, sort of like very quickly, I had a rapport and thought, I'm going to invest in this guy, whatever he does. And that was an investment very quickly. And then over time, also sort of helped him turn that company into a fintech company. And the idea there is he has all this data around what people are doing in distribution.
That he can leverage.
And you can leverage that to be a lender or insurer.
That's super interesting. I always appreciate the retrospective that investors like yourself give. You mentioned stories about Ryan being scrappy and how you shared in that. What are some other stories where you've been scrappy as a founder?
Yeah, interesting. So I think you just hear stories of founders who are kind of doing whatever it takes on whatever money they have to make things work. For myself, it's funny, like I don't necessarily think being cheap is the right thing. It's about really being scrappy and figuring out ways to get in front of customers. One story that I've told is I was trying to get in front of this one customer in our auction business, and they were never responsive to me. So I went to this conference, had looked up all over the internet what they look like, and then I found that they were a smoker. I am not a smoker, but I bought a pack of cigarettes so that I could go out and smoke a cigarette with this person, started talking to them. It eventually led to a sale. And so like that sort of mentality of like just doing whatever it takes really is one that I love.
That is the definition of scrappy. I gotta tell you that. That's awesome. I'm curious, there's a general trend, I think, especially in the public sphere now, for VCs to talk about deals they've missed, things that they got wrong. Are there any that come to mind for you?
Yeah, of course. There's so many that I got wrong. So one is Robinhood. So I met Robinhood very early on, and I thought, hey, there have been all these other free trading apps before. I had looked at it, I'd seen a company called Free Trade. There was one called Zecco. And so I thought, what makes Robinhood any different? And what I missed was they got so many things right. They executed really well. But what I missed was Zecco and Free Trade were competing with TD Ameritrade and Interactive Brokers. But Robinhood was not. They got mobile and timing really well. And so they brought an entirely new class of investors online with way better
Yep.
UX than the other products. And so they've done obviously phenomenally well. Another one that I missed is Chime. At
Oh,
500,
wow.
we'd invested in Simple, which was one of the first neobanks. And I thought, and Simple like was a really good product, awesome team. I'm friends with them. But they were able to build a huge wait list, get people onto the app, but people were not willing to switch their direct deposit account over. And that's the way that you make money, is being the primary
Money,
deposit.
yeah.
So what I missed on Chime is, again, mobile and timing and execution. They've done a great job of building products that make consumers want to switch their direct deposit over, including getting you money faster and stuff like that. And times were different back when Simple was starting. It was a lot harder to get started. And now there's a generation of people who want more digitally. So that makes sense for Chime. Simple attracted people like me, digitally native people, but being served fine by the Chases of the world. And Chime has succeeded by creating this like digital first approach for those who already were not well served by the existing banks.
Interesting.
So
Wow.
those are a couple. Actually, there's so many. Another one is Patreon.
Oh, wow.
I literally met Patreon early on and I thought, this is so damn easy to build. It's just a basic payments functionality. I could build this myself on Stripe. What is unique about it? And that was so stupid in hindsight. Those are all some big misses. Fortunately, they were years ago. And I think I would think differently today, but probably not. Like, I'm still missing companies. The nice thing is you don't have to get all of them.
Yeah.
You can just be right once in a while and have a phenomenal track record as a VC. And that's been really good for us so far.
I want to spend a second on that because I spent a bit of time in private equity, and in that world, there are obviously companies that are profitable. You're making millions and billions of dollars
Yeah.
in exits. It's a shorter investment horizon usually, and there's a level of stability there, even if the multiples aren't as large. With VC, it's incredibly attractive, but it also comes with this risk of having to get it right. There's a chance that you could never find that one, two, or the next 10. How did you consider that risk when you were going into this career as a VC investor? And why did you still want to go into this role despite knowing that that was a possibility?
You have to appreciate going in that a lot of what you invest in isn't going to succeed. And I think that's okay because the upside is so much. Like in private equity, your potential multiple horizon is not that high.
Yep.
Versus for us, already in my fund from 2017, we have a company that exited at 78x. And then we have
Wow.
2 other companies that are in this coming round going to be actually more than that. And that's just
Wow.
amazing and something you do not see in private equity.
No, we're certainly in the single digit multiples.
Yeah, exactly. So that's something that is pretty cool to think about. And then if you believe, like I have believed in the past, I'm thinking about for the future, that people have been undervaluing these assets, then there's a real opportunity. And now I think valuation multiples on fintech, certainly in the past year, have come up pretty high. So maybe that undervaluing will not continue. But if you believe that the world of opportunity for these companies is huge, then like the street had been undervaluing them. And I think that's true.
That makes a ton of sense. And there's also obviously so much being built right now that it's an apt time to be an investor. So I think it's also interesting that you sit on the investment committee for the Catalyst Fund, which supports entrepreneurs building financial solutions in countries like India, Kenya, Nigeria. I'm curious, what is the experience like working on fintech for these developing countries and investing in them, especially with your background, having spent time in India and other places?
Yeah, I love it. So, we talked about this earlier. Better tomorrow. We exist to build a better future. I feel like super cliche saying that, but it's actually true. And a part of that is bringing people into the financial world. And I am fortunate, so to speak, that I've been able to see that firsthand in India, both working at Kiva and then through my family. My father's side of the family was very poor and didn't have a whole lot growing up. And I was able to see what access to financing has done for them. And so it is something that's just really important to me. And then I also think that there's a tremendous opportunity to bring companies in who otherwise might have trouble raising money, help them through the program, and then invest in those companies. And some very successful companies have come out of that. One of mine that's the most successful that I invested in and did Catalyst is a company called Chipper Cash. It's
Okay.
a peer-to-peer payments product in Africa that does cross-border payments. And when I invested a little over 2 years ago, they only had a few thousand users. They did Catalyst, and Catalyst sort of helped them hone in on who their right customer demographic is. And now they have millions of users, have raised an insane amount of money from great
Wow.
investors, including Jeff Bezos. It's been like an amazing
Wow.
story. And it was sort of achieved because I was looking to help companies working in financial inclusion, and they are certainly doing that. And it's amazing.
Yeah, I appreciate that you've paid that experience forward and maintained that connection to your roots in this way. Obviously, you've talked about Kiva, your family background. In that vein, how has your identity as a South Asian informed your work as an investor and entrepreneur over the years?
Yeah. So first of all, like I think I'm definitely have so many Indian tendencies. Like especially actually like I'm Marwari, like from Rajasthan, and I think a lot of my tendencies come from my parents who come from that background. One of which is being very frugal, and I think I definitely have that. And my partner loves to make fun of me about that. I think it's also like one that I'm interested in investing in India. We haven't done a whole lot there yet, but we actually are doing one now. But it's just a market that I think is so fascinating. Sort of similar to what we were talking about earlier. There's just an opportunity to open up this finances to a billion people. And
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. One company that I'm actually looking at in India right now that I'm really excited about is called India Gold. One of the things in India that you probably know is people hold a lot of gold.
Yep.
And it's actually like a real drag on the economy because that's unproductive money, basically. And
Yeah, it
so the
just sits
idea with
there.
India Gold is, can we make this productive? So the idea is they give people a very low cost locker in which to store their gold securely. And then you can get it out whenever you need. You have a wedding, you can take it out, whatever. But they assess that gold and they give you credit against it anytime. So like your gold's in that locker stored securely for cheap, but then you're at the store and you want to buy a TV, you could just use your card that is tied to that gold account. So I think that's pretty cool, something that I
Yeah.
recently looked at and looking to do more in India.
Yeah, that's something I find super interesting about the concept of investing in ecosystems abroad where you have some sort of cultural connection or share in that background, because in
Completely.
the instance you just mentioned, that's a dynamic that people like you and I uniquely understand, because we know
Totally.
that Indians hold on to a lot of jewelry for weddings and other occasions, and that's a long-standing tradition in the country. And that startup's concept is not necessarily that would work in the United States.
Yeah, exactly.
And I just think it's so fascinating that there are dynamics that cut across cultural lines, and the opportunity lies in being able to understand those dynamics and see if there's really product market fit and having that unique lens. So I find that super fascinating. Thanks for sharing that. There is another facet to this that I'm curious about, because in the realm of investing across developing
Hmm.
countries, like you're doing with the Catalyst Fund, there can emerge a sort of paternalism that has
Yeah,
led to problematic products being proliferated in these countries, or dynamics that maybe someone didn't intentionally create, but have created and have unfortunately led to worse conditions. The example that I'm thinking of off the top of my head, and this is obviously based on a ton of anecdotal evidence, and I don't think it was intentional, but in the case of Tala, for example, there's a lot of conversations about how Kenyans feel they've suffered from loan sharking type behavior from a product that was meant to give them access to financing that they didn't previously have. How do you scope for that? And how do you think about that as a fintech investor investing in these markets?
I think one of the things we think about a lot is the early team local? Oftentimes the founders that we invest in may not be local. Sometimes they are, but are they building a team around them that really understands the problem well? Or is it classic Silicon Valley building for a market that they are not exposed to?
Yep.
And I think some of these companies have made some missteps for sure, especially in Africa. And a lot of companies made missteps, but were able to raise a lot of money and then retreated from a bunch of markets. But I think understanding what is going on locally is really important. And fortunately, we have funds in a bunch of different geographies that we partner with. So like we're LPs in a bunch of funds, and then they're just folks that we talk to very regularly to get a pulse for what makes sense in a particular market.
Yeah. Super interesting. Yeah, I feel that'll be an ongoing conversation. I think it's getting easier as globalization happens and we're just better able to understand the dynamics there. But I do think it's fascinating because we've seen financial products take a right or left turn now and then.
Totally.
You've obviously learned so much over the years with your experience in investing and as a founder. What are some things you wish you knew before you got started in either of these worlds?
Ooh, I think as an investor, there's so much I didn't know. I didn't realize when I was an angel investor, like I didn't even realize that you have to win the deal. I was just like, oh yeah, I saw that deal. I would have invested in that company. I didn't know that actually you have to win the right to invest in that company. Not just anyone can invest. And sometimes they have 8 times as much demand as they have space and around. So that's one thing. I think the main takeaway for me though, over my now 5 years in venture has just been invest in people. It's what everybody says, but it's more true than even I thought going in. You just are going to spend a lot of time with these people that you're investing in. And so you want to make sure that you get along with them, but then also what you're investing in may change, but the person that you're investing in probably won't. So I think that's been my biggest learning.
Yeah, no, super interesting. I think your point on like not considering winning the deal is fascinating because sometimes you see the glamorized parts of the process and you don't understand what's really going on behind the scenes and what there is to still learn. I'm curious, there's so much about you out there on the internet and the world and your resume. What's something that we wouldn't know about you from your resume alone?
Ooh, I'm a pretty public person, so there's nothing that secretive. Yeah, no, everything's out there. If you follow my Twitter, you get a good glimpse into what I'm doing. One thing that I was going to say, not exciting, but I'm dealing with a renovation at home right now. And so dealing with the permitting process of San Francisco, which is not very exciting, but that's something that you would not know, I guess. Otherwise.
Are you going to join the Miami cohort? Is that what's going to happen?
I don't think so. I do think San Francisco is still the best place to build a company, probably, depending on the type of company. And I think it's still the best place to be a VC. I do think the delta between San Francisco and anywhere else has decreased substantially, but I want to give myself every chance to be in the best place. And I think a lot of founders do too. Some founders that we have backed in other places are actually moving to San Francisco now. So I think that Miami move remains to be seen. I actually am excited about Miami, and I think it'll be great to have another tech hub, but I haven't been out there in the past few months, but a lot of my VC friends have, and they came back not liking Miami. So we'll see.
Yeah. I'm curious to see how some of these other hubs spring up. I'm based out of Atlanta and I've seen it grow tremendously over even just the past 10 years. And it's exciting to see these new ecosystems being built because I think it also democratizes access to building a company and access to capital and things like that. So super fascinating. Something I have to ask, you appeared in Justin Bieber and Ariana Grande's Stuck With You video. How on earth did that happen?
Yeah. Okay. So it's a long story. It involves Clubhouse. So
of course,
I was on this show called the Zoom Bachelorette, which is like a bachelor, like the TV show, but made for the pandemic on Zoom. And I was one of the contestants. On Clubhouse, they did a viewing party of this Zoom Bachelorette. And Scooter Braun was in the room and was like, I like this candidate, Sheel. Then I came into the room after the viewing and I was talking to Scooter and we were just like, what are you up to? And he was like, I'm watching this while editing this music video in the background. And we were like, what's the video? And he was like, I should put you in the video. And then I submitted this video. He told me what to do. He was like, just send me a 10-second video. I'll put you in it. And he put me in it in a pretty prominent spot. So it's
That's
pretty cool.
amazing. That's amazing. I love that. That's awesome. I'm curious. I mean, you do so much in the realm of fun things like this, investing, just staying engaged in a variety of ways. What advice do you have to young South Asians who are also, in a word, trying to multitask and pursue all their different passions?
Yeah. I would say, especially when you're young, try everything. Why not? I've tried so many things and failed. Do not be afraid of failure. Like your mom and dad probably beat it into you to be afraid of failure, like mine had. But actually, they've come around too into failure not being a bad thing. So I would just say try things, be authentic. And for me, my South Asian background and roots have been really important to me. Every day, have a group of friends where we share like stupid Indian memes. It's been really great. I listen to a lot of Hindi music. It's a big part of my identity and I haven't lost it. I go back to India frequently. And so I'd say like be proud of your heritage and it's definitely served me well.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it's very different from usually the advice we get. But I think staying true to your roots and embracing them is a big thing, no matter all the things that you end up doing in life. So I love that.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks so much for joining me, Sheel. I really appreciate your time. This was a fantastic conversation.
Thanks, Simi. Great to be here.
This is a podcast from Trailblazers Media. For more content on South Asian trailblazing, follow us at South Asian Trailblazers on Instagram and Facebook.